You start learning English, and it feels like, well, everyone has an opinion on the right way to do it.
Oh, absolutely.
So today we're diving deep into some of those ingrained ideas about English learning, the stuff you might have heard so often you just, accepted it as fact. Prepare yourself, because we might just be about to overturn some long-held beliefs about your English journey.
That's exactly right. So many learners are trying to navigate this landscape filled with well-meaning, but honestly sometimes misguided advice.
Yeah.
And it can leave them feeling, well, confused and unsure about their progress, really.
I bet.
So our goal today is to cut through that confusion, maybe shed some light on some really common myths, and hopefully offer a clearer and maybe more encouraging path forward.
Fantastic. Okay, so we're going to be tackling some big ones, right? Like the pressure to have that perfect native speaker accent.
The classic.
The idea you need to conquer grammar before you can even think about speaking.
Oh, that one.
Yeah. Those super tempting but maybe unrealistic promises of like rapid fluency.
The 3-month specials.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And even the idea that your own language is somehow the enemy when you're learning English. So where should we start unraveling all this?
Well, let's begin with one that causes a lot of unnecessary stress, I think. The idea that you must sound exactly like a native speaker.
Ah, yes. The elusive native speaker sound. It's like this phantom benchmark everyone's supposed to reach. You hear it all the time. You need to aim for a perfect accent.
Right.
But then you have to ask perfect. Like who? My grandfather always used to joke, if you want to speak properly, you need to sound like you went to Oxford. Which,
Lightly, not exactly helpful.
not exactly attainable or even desirable for most people, right?
No, and your grandfather's comment really highlights how persistent this idea is. But the truth is, the whole concept of a single native speaker standard, it just doesn't hold up. I mean, think about the sheer variety of accents just within the English-speaking world. Someone from Boston sounds completely different from someone in London or Melbourne or Cape Town.
Or even Glasgow. I remember trying to understand a colleague from Glasgow once. Native speaker, totally fluent. But honestly, it felt like listening to a different language sometimes. The accent, the local phrases, communication was actually a real challenge at first.
Exactly. So, look, if native English speakers themselves have such varied accents that can sometimes be hard for other native speakers to understand,
Right.
why on earth should learners feel they need to mimic one specific, often idealized version? The real aim, the real goal should be intelligibility.
Intelligibility, right?
Can people understand you? Are you getting your ideas across clearly and effectively? That's what really matters.
That makes a lot more sense as the actual goal.
And it's important to recognize, too, that English is this truly global language now. It's spoken by millions all over the world in countless variations. We often call them world Englishes.
Like Indian English, or
Exactly. Indian English, Singaporean English, Nigerian English. These are all thriving, dynamic, perfectly legitimate forms of the language. They each have their own unique features, their own richness.
so my accent. It's okay.
Your accent is part of your identity. It reflects your unique linguistic journey. As long as it doesn't genuinely stop people from understanding you, it's not just acceptable, it's something to value.
Okay, so I can finally stop trying to nail that perfect, like, transatlantic accent from old movies.
Smiling. Definitely a good move. Honestly, instead of trying to erase your natural way of speaking, focus on things like clear articulation of sounds, using the right rhythm and intonation to get your meaning across effectively. Don't get hung up on trying to sound like someone you're not.
Right.
In fact, sometimes a non-native accent, as long as it's clear, can be really quite charming, quite engaging. Trying too hard to mimic some specific prestige accent can sometimes sound a bit, well, forced or unnatural.
Okay, that's a really liberating thought. So this myth of you must sound like a native speaker.
Oh, I think we can confidently say that one is thoroughly busted.
Busted. All right, let's tackle myth number 2. Grammar first, fluency later. This feels very like school classroom, doesn't it?
It really does.
The idea that you have to have all the grammatical building blocks perfectly in place before you can even attempt to, string a sentence together.
Yes, this often comes from that old grammar translation method. Historically, it put this huge emphasis on explicitly studying grammar rules, often, like, totally in isolation.
Worksheets.
Exactly, before any real focus on speaking or listening. Now, look, a good grasp of grammar, it definitely gives you a valuable framework, no doubt.
Sure.
but prioritizing it so much that it actually becomes a barrier to communicating, especially early on, that can be incredibly demotivating. It can really slow down your progress towards actually using the language.
It can create this fear, right? This fear of making mistakes that just stops you from even trying to speak. I remember feeling so self-conscious about getting tenses wrong that I'd just clam up.
Exactly. And language, I mean, at its heart, it's a tool for connection, for communication. Think about learning to ride a bicycle.
Okay.
Could you become a skilled cyclist just by studying the mechanics of the bike and reading manuals, but without ever actually getting on and pedaling?
No way. You'd know everything about it, but you couldn't do it.
Precisely. You might understand the theory perfectly, but the practical skill comes from actually doing it. And it's similar with language. Fluency comes from actively using the language, even when it's not perfect.
That's a really helpful way to think about it.
I remember someone I knew who had this incredibly detailed knowledge of English grammar. I mean, they could dissect complex sentences like nobody's business,
Oh.
but put them in a simple, everyday situation like ordering coffee in English,
Oh.
and they'd just become completely flustered, agonizing over getting every single grammatical detail precisely right, to the point where they really struggled to communicate their basic need. Perfect grammar in theory, but, well, a breakdown in actual communication.
The classic analysis paralysis.
Yeah.
So what's a better approach then? Just ignore grammar completely and hope for the best.
No, not at all. It's about developing what linguists call communicative competence.
Okay.
The main focus should be on your ability to get your message across effectively. Making errors, that's an inherent, totally necessary part of learning.
That's how you learn, right?
It is, and you really should learn grammar in context by seeing it in real communication, by noticing patterns as you read and listen. That lets you refine your language skills more organically, rather than seeing grammar as this giant hurdle you have to leap over before you can even start speaking.
So the key takeaway here is kind of communicate first, then refine the grammar as you go along.
Precisely. Get comfortable using the language to express yourself, even if your sentences aren't always, grammatically flawless. Fluency often builds confidence. And that confidence actually makes tackling the trickier bits of grammar less daunting later on.
Okay. Myth number 2. Grammar first, fluency later.
Yep, well and truly busted.
Busted. Okay, let's move on to myth number 3, and oh boy, this is a big one you see plastered all over the internet. Become fluent in English in just 3 months. Buy our revolutionary new course.
Ah, yes, the magic bullet.
It's so tempting, isn't it? The idea of achieving fluency in such a short time. Is there, any truth to these claims?
Slightly amused. Well, if only language learning were that quick, wouldn't that be nice? First off, let's just unpack that word fluency. What does it actually mean?
Good point.
For one person, it might mean being able to have simple, everyday conversations. For someone else, it might mean being able to discuss, complex quantum physics with ease and nuance.
Big difference.
Huge difference. Reaching a genuinely comfortable, versatile level of fluency. That typically requires consistent effort and dedicated practice over a much more substantial period than 3 months.
So no magic formula then? No secret shortcut to instant fluency?
Unfortunately, no. Look, an intensive period of study, maybe full immersion in an English-speaking place, that can definitely lead to significant progress in 3 months.
Sure, if you already have a base.
Right, especially if you already have some foundational knowledge. But the idea of going from, say, a complete beginner to truly fluent in that time frame, it's highly improbable for the vast majority of learners, especially given, life, jobs, families, other commitments. These promises, they often just prey on wishful thinking.
And it must be so disheartening for people who buy into these programs hoping for super fast results, and then they feel like they've failed when they're not suddenly perfectly fluent in 90 days.
Exactly that. The real danger there is the disappointment, the potential loss of motivation that happens when these unrealistic expectations aren't met.
Yeah.
Learners might unfairly blame themselves, thinking, oh, I'm just no good at languages, instead of realizing that the initial promise was, well, fundamental unrealistic.
So learning a language is more like training for a marathon than trying to win a quick sprint.
That's a perfect analogy. It's about building consistent, sustainable habits. Regular, shorter periods of focused study. They're generally much more effective in the long run than these sporadic, intense bursts that are just hard to maintain.
Little and often.
Little and often. Embrace the journey, Celebrate the small milestones along the way and be very, very skeptical of any claims promising rapid, effortless fluency.
Okay. So those get fluent in 3 months ads.
Definitely another myth that's busted.
Right, busted. Okay, for our bonus myth today, let's tackle this one. Never, ever use your native language when you're learning English. This whole idea of total immersion, sticking to English at all costs, even when you're really struggling. Have you come across this belief a lot?
Oh, absolutely. It's a pretty common piece of advice, this idea of creating a purely English-only zone.
Yeah.
And I know many learners, they sometimes feel this sense of guilt almost, or like they're somehow failing if they, resort to using their native language. Maybe looking up a translation or thinking through a tricky grammar point in their first language, their L1.
Exactly.
Right.
It feels like you're cheating or not fully committed if you're not thinking in English 24/7.
But the reality is, your native language, it isn't a hindrance. It's actually a hugely valuable cognitive tool that you already have.
Yeah.
Think about it. You've already developed this really sophisticated understanding of how language works in general. You can leverage that existing knowledge to help you learn English.
How so?
Well, for example, you can often grasp new English words more quickly by finding cognates words that look or sound similar and have similar meanings in your own language, or just similar concepts.
Right.
And you can understand complex grammar structures by drawing parallels to structures you already get in your L1. Especially for beginners, honestly, a quick explanation in their native language can often clear up a confusing point much more efficiently than struggling through a long explanation purely in English.
So it's not about completely abandoning your native language, but maybe using it strategically as a kind of support.
Precisely. Strategically is the key word. As you get better at English, you'll naturally rely on your native language less and less for basic understanding. That just happens. But in the early stages, or when you hit particularly tricky vocabulary or grammar, using your L1 as a bridge to understanding, that can be incredibly effective. It can prevent a lot of unnecessary frustration.
That makes sense.
The goal, remember, is to add another language to your skills, to become bilingual or multilingual. It's not about somehow erasing your first language. So really, there's absolutely no need to feel guilty about using the amazing linguistic resources you already possess.
That's actually really reassuring to hear. Okay, so the never use your native language myth.
Soundly busted.
Yeah, okay. It's quite eye-opening, isn't it, to see how many of these deeply ingrained ideas about learning English just don't really hold up under scrutiny.
It really is.
So now that we've cleared away some of these common misconceptions, what are some actual effective principles? What would you recommend for someone who's on their English learning journey right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let's pivot to some truths. Here are 3 key things that I believe are absolutely essential for successful language learning.
Okay.
Firstly, consistency truly is king, or queen. Regular, even short study sessions are way more beneficial than trying to cram for hours infrequently.
Right.
Just 15 to 30 minutes of focused practice each day, that can lead to much more significant progress over time. It's just how our brains work with spaced repetition and keeping things active.
Makes sense. Number 2.
Secondly, prioritize communication over perfect grammar, especially when you're speaking. Don't let that fear of making mistakes stop you from actually using the language.
Yeah, we talked about that.
Mistakes are just a natural, valuable part of learning. The main point of language is to connect with people, get your meaning across. So focus on that.
Communication over perfection. Got it. And third.
And thirdly, make your learning enjoyable and relevant to you, to your own interests.
Important.
Find ways to bring English into activities you already like doing. Watch movies or TV shows in English. Listen to English music. Read books or articles about stuff that fascinates you.
Connect with people.
Yes. Connect with language exchange partners who share your hobbies. When learning feels engaging and personally meaningful, you're just much more likely to stay motivated and keep going consistently.
Those are some really empowering and practical truths to keep in mind. Consistency, communication, making it enjoyable. That's advice that kind of resonates beyond just language learning, I think.
Absolutely. They're good life principles too, really.
Well, this has been a truly insightful deep dive into some of the persistent myths around English language learning. Hopefully for you listening, this has maybe cleared up some of the conflicting advice you've heard and perhaps given you a renewed sense of confidence in your own journey.
Yeah.
A massive thank you to our resident linguistic legend for sharing all that expertise with us today.
It was my pleasure. It's all about finding what works for you, really.
And to you, our fantastic listener, we're curious. What English learning myths have you bumped into? What have you heard? We'd genuinely love to hear about them. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your experiences could even spark a future deep dive.
Yeah, definitely share.
And of course, don't forget to like this deep dive if you found it helpful, subscribe for more in-depth explorations, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next dive into the fascinating world of knowledge. Until next time, keep exploring and keep questioning those long-held beliefs.